and I was always very conscious of the fact that the countryside around us was disappearing and being compromised, and that was one of the reasons I wanted to immigrate. And within that time I applied for a job, because to emigrate to Canada at that time you had to have a job to get your immigrant status, and I got that, and it was a job at Vancouver General Hospital, and yes, I got that in that first year and went there in 75. The reasons is that I felt increasingly constrained by the pressure of population, when the population of this country was, I'm guessing it was about 54 million in 1973, something about that. I mean, I think the first day I was there, the guy, he became my friend, owned the local grocery store, took me fishing, and in 2 hours I hooked 8 salmon. And I was staying with this businessman in a hostel in Tel Aviv, and I told him I was going over to the West Bank. And he looked at me and he said, "You're going to the West Bank?" He said, "Are you crazy?" He said, "You won't be safe there. You know, you go there and the mullahs, they preach jihad against us." Well, it wasn't what I'd heard anyway, so because I'd been to Bethlehem briefly beforehand in the West Bank. So I went there, and his perception could not have been more wrong.
Hi, and welcome to the There's Another Way podcast with me, Adam Halverson.
And me, Pete Dolby. And you've come to the place where each episode we'll be shining a light on authentic people who have chosen an alternative path to their new normal to find another way.
Today we have a conversation with Richard Beard. I've known Richard since I was a young boy, and from my very earliest memories, I always remember his enthusiasm, zest for life, and his alternate ways of thinking. In this conversation, we cover his passion for nature, his fascinating travel stories, and his time as a dentist, which took him on some journeys you really wouldn't expect, to places like the Yukon Valley in northern Canada, where he was acting as a remote dentist to some of the Inuit communities. But we hope you enjoy. So, Richard, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So you've made a fairly long journey over here, which we'll get into. But like I said, you know, I think Pete and I have been looking forward to this a lot. I think what's really exciting for us is that this is a little bit of a new format, because we weren't able to do our normal level of research and get into the detail that we might. So we're not prepared. The only background I have is from what I have grown up around you with, and Pete's got absolutely no background whatsoever. So with that said, what would be fantastic is let's start from the beginning. Let's start on where was life as a kid, and if that's okay, and go from there.
Well, I feel very privileged because life as a kid was very good. And when you look at everything that's going on in the world today, you realise just how privileged we were. Grew up with parents who loved me and looked after me in a safe environment, in a decent place with lovely fishing nearby and really good friends at school. And, you know, how many people are in that situation, especially today? So, yes, I feel very privileged. And at the same time, there were expectations that went along with that privilege. You know, a father that wanted you to go into a profession, preferably medicine. That's what he wanted, and a whole system which basically added to those expectations, like from school in an old-fashioned, as it would have to have been 60-odd years ago, that was competitive. It was full of expectations, full of expecting you to do your duty, like turning up to play for the school team on the weekend, whether you wanted to or not, etc., etc. So I was destined for the life steered me in the conventional direction, no question.
And just to was your family medical? Was there a reason to go down that particular path, or?
No, not at all. Nobody in our family had anything to do with medicine at all. It was just regarded as a respected profession, and one where my parents thought one could have a good, reliable career. And that was, of course, a high priority for people who had been through the war years, and security was very much at the front of their minds, and that's what they wanted to pass on to us.
And I suppose in their own way, it's their way of caring, nurturing. But, I guess you already alluded to is maybe there were some elements of, did you have masses of choice in that? Or
I would say theoretically, yes. But in practice, the expectation and the momentum was so strong that it would have been difficult to break out of it. I always look back on it and think that it would actually have taken a conscious effort on my part not to do what I did. Just to go to university and get a profession. Happened to be dentistry, but it could have been medicine or something else. It would have taken a conscious effort on my part not to go there.
And was there anything? Did you question it, or it was just a case of let's just go with it? And
at the time, I went with it because I could see the benefits too. And in latter years as a teenager, the increasing benefit I saw was the ability to work overseas. And it gave me a choice. If I thought I got a good profession, it would give me a choice of where I could go to work, because I would have a transportable skill. So yes, by the time I went to university, that was very much in front of my mind. That's why I chose what I did. Largely it was an expediency thing, not because I had any great love for the profession.
Okay. And just to set the scene, so where was home? What sort of part of the country or the world was home?
Well, I grew up near Reading early and went to school in Bracknell, 10 miles away by train. And then I went to university from there to Birmingham and graduated from Birmingham in 73.
And did you have any siblings growing up, Richard, that maybe had similar pressures from the parents into getting into a certain profession, or
I would say yes. My brother a little less, because he was much younger than me, 15 years younger than me, and my sister 8 years younger than me. Yes, I would think it's fair to say that she also would have had this similar sort of pressure, expectation, however you want to describe it. Yes.
Yeah. It's a common theme we hear quite a lot, is that people that have parents want the best for their children, and they put pressure on them to fulfil a certain career path, and then halfway through down that journey they think, well, this is not quite for me, I need to maybe look at doing something else. But I think it's fairly common, I would say. But so after that it then took you to university, and how did you find university when you got there? Was it...
Well, again, I felt privileged, because in those days, the government gave you a full grant. You didn't have to borrow any money. I mean, I think the average dentist qualifying now has thousands, tens, hundreds of thousands of pounds, especially if you're in the US, in debt when they qualify. We had no debt, because everything was covered, tuition as well as living expenses. Yeah. So it was pretty incredible.
But I guess the criteria to get in was probably harder back then.
No, it was easier. When I got into dentistry, I could have got into Leeds Dental School, and I've been to Leeds, and actually it's a decent place. I could have got in there.
Shame about the football team.
Well, I'm a Villa supporter, so I'll have to agree with you there. So, Leeds offered me a place for 3 E's, and Birmingham, which is where I ended up going, I could have got to with 3 D's. So, no, academic requirements, I hear, have become a lot more stringent. In fact, I wouldn't have made it because I didn't get 3 A's, which I understand is about what it takes now.
Wow. So I guess that must have been an element of wanting people to get into those professions. And
yes, there was, but I understand that for Birmingham, there were like dozens and dozens of applicants for each place. But it wasn't just a question of your A-level grades, and I understand it's increasingly going automatically to automatic grades to get you in. They actually sat you down for an interview and wanted to know what you were like as a person, what your interests are. And I don't know to what extent that takes place anymore. And I think personally, I think that as a dentist or anybody in the profession, those are vital questions to ask, because those, your character and how you relate to people on a factor of 0 to 10 is a 10, whereas you're attaining absolute academic excellence in getting 3 A's, I would rate probably a 3 as far as dentistry is concerned. So I think the world in many, and that's one example of many, how the world is, in my opinion, turned a bit upside down.
Fantastic. Yeah, well, I mean, I guess it's been a while since I've applied for a degree, but yeah, I would imagine, I wouldn't say the process will be probably like that, and I think it would be much more academic focused to get in. So that's really interesting. And did you have any other sort of, aside from the education route, were there any other passions, growing up in Reading, going on to university? Was there anything else outside of, career and everything? What else was your... what was your vibe? What did you enjoy?
Well, my passion was fishing. And I also was passionate about wildlife. I had an interest in butterflies from a very young age. And I was always very conscious of the fact that the countryside around us was disappearing and being compromised, and that was one of the reasons I wanted to immigrate, because I could see the countryside where I was growing up and loved and did all my activities disappearing. So I felt early on that I wanted to go to a place where there was enough space where that was never going to happen.
Yeah. And what was it that pulled you into nature? It sounds like an obvious question, but not everybody gets it. What?
That's it. Yes. Well, I've identified that from very, very early in my life, because my mum was one of 10 on a farm in North Devon. And right from, I think I was 6 weeks old when my parents had to leave me at the farm to be looked after by my aunts and uncles. And forever after that, 2 or 3 times a year, we'd spend all school holidays at the farm. And it was a beautiful place, 500 acres of fields and hedges and rabbits and, martins nesting under the eaves of the house, and feeding the lambs, collecting eggs from the chickens, anything to do with animals and being outside and the freedom. And then that progressed to when I was 6, catching butterflies in the neighbour's buddleia bush, and then being introduced by friend Brian when I was 14 to fishing. And it's sort of one thing led to another. And so, yes, it was all about nature and being outside and wildlife and fish.
Yeah. And what is it about fishing that sort of grabs you?
Well, what grabs me now is what was different from what grabbed me then. When I started fishing, and as a teenager, it was the excitement of the actual fishing and the anticipation, never quite knowing what you were going to catch out of the River Thames. Being out at night, it was mysterious. And when you live in the UK, it's the one way you can have the place to yourself, in the middle of the Thames at night. And the nightjars are going, and you could be anywhere in the world because those are the only sounds you hear. So to me, it was magical. The fishing, the whole aspect of it.
Fantastic. And I suppose also, I mean, you think of the Thames, especially, I mean, I don't know, I haven't been, I'll be honest, I haven't been fishing in a while. But I wouldn't even know what's in the Thames anymore, as in what state it's in, what conditions it's in. I guess, is it still a good place to fish?
I think it's probably a better place to fish now than when I was a teenager. I mean, I've heard about the pollution events, which is obviously tragic and should never happen. But overall, I think the fishing has improved, because when I was a teenager, there weren't just episodes of sewage release. The Thames was chronically polluted all the time, a level of pollution. So that level of chronic pollution, I think, has been cleared up, and it reflects in the quality and number of fish that you catch, and also the bird life that you see. So when I see the Thames today, I see more birds, more like a kingfisher. I used to think that was amazing to see a kingfisher. Maybe once every 10 visits I'd see a kingfisher. Now every visit we see a kingfisher. But there are other downsides too. I mean, there are a whole bunch of invasive plants along the River Thames that were never there when I was a teenager, like Himalayan balsam and stuff like that. So, there's pluses and minuses.
But at least there's some positives, which is good.
There are positives, yeah. And overall, with the quality of the fishing, I would say that it's definitely improved from my experience.
It's a really good point. I find myself increasingly critical of the increasing densely populated areas that we live in today, and increasing amounts of cars, volumes of traffic and things like that. But how often do people spend time at night time enjoying nature, when people aren't around? Like you say, you have it to yourself. It's a really interesting point. You mentioned earlier on, Richard, about you had a view for going into dentistry because it allowed you to do some travel. Did you have any thoughts at that time about where that might take you, or where you might end up at that point? Or was it just an open mind to seeing where in the world you might end up?
I had an inclination for Canada, and or New Zealand, and the other place I considered was South Africa. But that was a sort of a general concept at that time. All those places at that time I felt I had opportunity for further travel and open spaces and wildlife.
Right. Okay.
So it was, but I just knew that I would be wanting to go somewhere, right? With those qualities.
And that was as soon as you finished university, or did you envisage that you'd work first and gain some experience before you'd then go travelling?
That was when I left school. I think I had those thoughts, and then when I finished university, it had progressed to Canada, because by then I knew a little bit more about the places, and it had what I felt I wanted.
Brilliant, and along with the nature as well, I suppose. As well.
Yeah, it was nature. So I worked for the NHS in an NHS practice for 18 months after graduating, and within that time I applied for a job, because to emigrate to Canada at that time you had to have a job to get your immigrant status, and I got that, and it was a job at Vancouver General Hospital, and I got that in that first year, and went there in 75.
Right. And what was what do you think planted the seed for that travel? What was the reason? Because you mentioned it this evening early on, as in it was obviously something that was on your radar. What do you think the reasons were?
The reasons were that I felt increasingly constrained by the pressure of population. When the population of this country was, I'm guessing it was about 54 million in 1973, something about that. But even at that population, I felt constrained. I felt the place was too crowded. I didn't like the traffic on the roads, which sounds laughable now when you look at the roads today. And I just really wanted go to a place where, if I wanted to, I could spend 6 months without seeing anybody. Not that I ever did that, but that's what I was looking for, and where I could see wildlife, and it's as it had been for hundreds of thousands, millions of years.
And when you say use the word constraints, were you sort of, did you find it oppressive, the population, the environment, was it sort of just something you knew you had to change?
For me, it's something that I felt I had to change for me. I needed to, yes, I did feel the pressure of the population. Everywhere you go seemed to be crowded, and I just wanted more space, and I think that puts it in a nutshell, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you were with the NHS, did 18 months. I guess first of all, how did you find that experience? Getting into the world of dentistry. How did you find it? But it sounded like the agenda to sort of get out of the UK was already there.
Yes, it was, because I applied for the job after 11 months working for the NHS and got the job, and got my immigrant status fairly quickly. So by 18 months I was gone. Yeah.
And how was the initial experience? Was it already something when you got into the NHS? Was it like this is a means to an end, or?
Yes, it was. I knew it was going to be a stepping stone because I was going somewhere. But it was positive, I would say, overall. I had no bad experiences, and the people I dealt with in Birmingham were delightful, and I enjoyed the working environment. The actual profession I didn't enjoy that much. Dentistry wasn't the right career for me, and anybody who's considering a career now, I'd really have to say to them, look very carefully, because if you go down the road of specialisation and you decide you don't like it, it's going to be very hard for you to change tack.
Yeah. I was just thinking then, I was interested to understand how the conversation went with your parents. Had you already planted the seed that you were going to be moving abroad, or did you have to sit them down and say, look, I'm going to Canada now? How did that conversation go?
It wasn't a conversation. I just decided to go, and
Right.
I told them I was leaving.
Okay.
I mean, I was at that point. I was, independent, and wasn't going to ask anybody's permission.
And I guess you were pursuing a career. Well, you were continuing your career in dentistry anyway, I suppose. So it
Yes.
kind of conformed to your parents' view on your career path.
Yes, very much so. It was a hospital job because I didn't have a license when I went to Canada to practice. So I got the exams and got that while I was working at the hospital. So it all worked out very well. It was very tidy, if you like, from that perspective.
And how were you feeling on the plane when you were sitting on the runway to head out to Canada?
I can remember it well.
Yeah.
It was. I felt very excited.
Yeah.
In those days, it was a Ward Air flight, and they gave you unlimited amount of alcohol.
Right. Well, that helps.
So, and there was a young lady sat beside me, and she was going visiting, and we kind of spurred each other on. So we were well oiled by the time we got off the plane in Vancouver. But it was just excitement.
Yeah.
And what was it about Canada that you mentioned South Africa, Canada, I think you said New Zealand. How was it that you narrowed down on Canada?
It's a lot bigger with a lot more space, and the fishing, especially up north, is I think unequalled, or was unequalled anywhere. In terms of salmon and halibut and all those things. And I didn't choose Canada as much as actually the west coast of Canada, British Columbia. I probably wouldn't have been as enthusiastic had it been Ontario or somewhere else. It was definitely British Columbia I was aiming for. And British Columbia has weather which is similar enough to here that that part would have been easy to take, and there was it's quite a big British influence in British Columbia. So yes, it was an easy move from the cultural aspect as well.
So I'm glad to say actually that is one place I've been. I have been to British Columbia, and it is unbelievable. It was a while ago now, but what was the job that you took? So you went from, I guess, I don't know if there was a specialism in dentistry that you had or anything like that, but.
No, I was a general dentist, and the job I got was I was a dental resident at Vancouver General Hospital. So it was working with consultants, under consultants, and the job was crummy. It wasn't like a hospital job here, where you get thrown in at the deep end and you have loads of cases to do and you're loads of learning and you're doing lots of practical good surgery and that kind of thing. And it wasn't like that at all, which was a big disappointment to me, the actual job. It was much more clerical and arranging beds for people, the sorts of jobs that somebody else, an administration, that would be doing.
I think it's really interesting. You mentioned earlier on about the experiences on the farm when you were a child, and then fishing with Brian at 14. That's almost driven and shaped your next step, hasn't it? Going to Canada for essentially having the similar experiences over there as well.
Absolutely.
How was it when you arrived there? Was it as you expected? Had you been to Canada before, or was it the first visit? So
I did. I had never been there before. I didn't know anybody who has been there. I just knew I wanted to go there. And when I got there, I was in Vancouver, so I pretty quickly met somebody who took me fishing, and we went into the interior, and the fishing was amazing, and on the coast as well for salmon, as well as in the interior for rainbow trout. But that job was for just a year, and Vancouver for me was just a staging post, because I wanted to get up north where the real fishing is and the real spaces are, and etc. So yes, I met a guy at Vancouver General Hospital who had worked up north, and he told me where, and I ended up getting a job in the same place as him on the Alaska border in northern British Columbia.
So that decision process might have happened quite quickly, and that you arrived and the job wasn't quite what you were expecting. You kind of knew it was an intermediary post to head up north. And so how long were you in Vancouver before you headed up?
Well, the job only lasted a year.
Okay.
That was it was only supposed to last a year. So I headed up north within a few weeks, really. We went on a trip up north for a holiday exploration, the Yukon, Alaska, that trip. And then it was on the way down through this small town that I got the job. The dentist that was working there before, he was going up there 1 week a month. He had resigned, and they had signs posted on they somehow through connections they knew I was up in that part of the world, and they had signs posted down on the highway. Dick Beard calling at Stuart, see the mayor. Well, I was supposed to get a job. Well, I didn't see the signs, but we went to Stuart anyway, and I needed a haircut. I'd been in the bush for 6 weeks, so I hadn't had a shave, and the hair was really long, because I had to go and see the mayor. Found out about that when I got to Stuart. And so I went into the local hotel, and I see this guy in scruffy clothes poking around, fixing something. And my idea of a mayor is, in this country, the chain around the neck and the election results and the announcement. And I said to this guy, excuse me, I said, can you tell me where I can find the mayor? And he stood up and he said, you must be Dick, he says. Welcome to Stuart. And he gave me the job, which, I mean, all this was just totally mystery to me, because it's such a small place up there, although it's vast territory. For community-wise, there are so few people up there. Everybody knows, there's this English guy who's a dentist who might be coming for a job, so the mayor knew about it, and it was just beyond my experience, and it just enhanced my feeling for the place.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So it sounded like you were quite comfortable. If we're talking about Yukon, Alaska, pretty extreme environments, and you say you just were up there for 6 weeks. Did you have any training? Were you, as in how to navigate the environment? If you were you say you were in the bush.
Well, we were just, we did some canoeing trips and, some hiking and that kind of thing. And, I just took to it like a duck to water. I still love canoeing to this day, heading off down some remote river. And, obviously you've got to do your homework and make sure you're not going to be tipped by a bunch of rapids in the middle of nowhere or lose all your gear. But, with that said, to me it's just an adventure. Going off on your own in the wilderness or anywhere like that is I get the same feeling as I used to going fishing on the Thames as a teenager. I can feel it.
But it's really interesting, because I think a lot of people would just be like, not even know where to start with that. For example, we go to Chamonix. We're going twice next year. We went twice this year. Some of the guys have done hikes in the Alps that just make me turn cold, as in not literally cold, but as in I just sit there thinking, how on earth, are you doing that type of thing? And I guess it's really interesting to me, because I'd love to think one day I'll push myself to do it, but not everybody is inclined that way, or they don't gravitate towards it. I think it's, because it almost sounds like you had a bit of a path, almost a bit of a predestined path to get up there, and it was almost like dentistry was a means to an end to do that.
Yeah, that's very much the case. And what really took me up there, and what took me through those experiences and the link, and what took me over the hump of the unknown and being in a remote place, was fishing. That was my focus, and when you're focused on something, other things tend to fall into place or get ignored, and that's how it was for me. So I ended up with a little cabin 40 miles from the nearest habitation, and that's where I would spend huge amounts of my time. And it was the fishing that drew me there and made me comfortable and then I got more and more comfortable in that environment.
I'm not sure how representative it is, but there was a show on here a couple of months ago called Race Across the World, where they have teams of people that race from one point to another, and they've done several series. The third series was from West Canada all the way over to the east coast of Canada. And what struck me about that, and it's a really interesting show because they don't allow mobile phones and they have budgets and what have you. What struck me about the Canadian series was two things. One, the vastness of Canada, and I have been, but not to British Columbia. The beauty of it was incredible, but also the kindness of strangers. Every point along the way, there were people that were willing to help and drive for hundreds of kilometres to help them on their mission to get there as quickly as possible. Did you find a lot of people were very friendly and kind when you're out there and helped you in your mission?
Oh, in spades.
Yeah.
And the further north you go, the friendlier and more open they get, because as I say, there aren't many people up there, and people are just used to help each other along. And I felt that instantly I got there. I mean, I think the first day I was there, the guy, he became my friend, owned the local grocery store, took me fishing, and in 2 hours I hooked 8 salmon.
Wow, that's a good ratio.
Not bad. So I decided right there and then I was gonna stay in Stuart.
Yeah,
yes,
incredible. Wow, what a great experience.
So, sorry to interrupt, Pete. Explain Stuart a little bit. I haven't heard of it. Explain to me what it's like, just to set the scene for people listening.
Stuart is the most northerly town on the west coast in Canada, on the coast. And it's right on the Alaska border at the head of a fjord, the Portland Canal. And Hyder, Alaska is 2 miles from Stuart. And it's when I went there would have been about 1,700 people living there. And the next nearest big town of any size, so it's about 200 miles away, is Terrace. And that has had a population at the time, not much more now, of about 15,000. So it was on its own, at the head of a field, surrounded by mountains, a postcard kind of a place. You pass a glacier when you're driving into it. It's 1,000 miles, pretty well, drive from Vancouver. And I was the only dentist there. In fact, I was the only dentist in the whole northwest corner of the province, area of probably 200,000 square kilometres.
Wow.
Wow.
That's absolutely enormous.
Yeah, so I remember people having toothache, and they're up in near Watson Lake or Cassia or one of those mining places up there, and it would take them, if the weather was bad, it would take them 6-7 more hours to get to Stuart and get their tooth problems looked after.
So did you have a practice in Stuart then, and people, you gained a reputation, and people would come from miles around to have work done or come and see you?
That's right. Well, there was a clinic established there previously, and somebody was going there from elsewhere in British Columbia 1 week a month. And then when I went there, that was initially what I was going to do, but I'd been there just a few days, and I decided I'm going to stay here. So I turned it into a full-time practice then, which is what it needed.
But is there not also a bit of fortune in that? Because what if there had been someone else doing the job? Was it good timing? Or?
It was very good timing, because the fellow who resigned, had that position for quite a while, and he just happened to vacated the post when I was on my way down the Cassio Highway to Stewart. So yeah, it's pure serendipity. But how often life works like that?
Brilliant. What would have happened? I mean, if he hadn't have left his post, you may have moved on somewhere else to find work. Then, do you think?
Yeah, and there were plenty of other places.
Yeah.
I mean, Whitehorse is a fabulous town up in the Yukon. I could have ended up there, and I would have had similar sorts of experiences there. I mean, the Yukon is an amazing place.
Yeah.
My granddaughter just got a job working up there,
Really?
and she's going to Whitehorse University starting in January.
Fantastic. And what's so special about Yukon for those that have never been or don't know much about it? What would you say is the most...
Well, the people, for one.
Yeah.
Again, there's that northern spirit and hospitality. Yeah. It's it's a very varied landscape, the south part of the Yukon, because you're quite close to the Alaska Panhandle and salt water. And yet in the Yukon, you've got Kluane Park, you've got mountains. It's
bears?
Lots of bears.
Yeah,
lots of grizzly bears and black bears and all the good stuff. Wolves. You go camping and you're out there in your tent and you hear the howling. Oh, I just love that.
Wow.
It's just magic. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, one thing I must say, excuse me, one thing I must say, Richard, is I remember ever since being a child, is your enthusiasm for things, even very basic things. I'm sensing that probably helped you a little bit on your journey. If you know, I mean, I'm not sure every person would end up in the Yukon Valley and maybe craft or carve the life you have. I mean, is that something you learn, as a child? Were you, I mean, I was explaining to Pete. I said one thing about Richard is you could have a pint of Peroni or Heineken and you'd make it sound like you're having a 1950 Margot, as in, just your curiosity and enthusiasm for anything. So I mean, I'm fascinated to understand, even just you talking about the Yukon Valley, which I guess is a bit different to a pint of beer, but I'm interested to understand where that comes from.
Well, just as an aside there, I'm going to replace that Heineken with a pint of Breckspear.
Yes.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
So where it comes from, it's a sort of progression from having the experience on the farm and the space, and then through butterflies, and then through fishing, and the need for space. It's a progressive thing. Actually, now you ask me that question, I can remember instances in my past when I ran away from home temporarily, at 4 years old, 5 years old, 6 years old, each of those years, to go exploring in the middle of the night. Well, I'd wait for my parents to go to bed, and I would sneak downstairs, and I would go to bed with my clothes on, so it was planned. And then I would open the window, and after they'd gone to bed, so 1 in the morning, I'd go exploring, for a mile or so, and then come back and shut the window and creep back up to bed.
Did they ever find out? Or?
Well, only when I admitted it, when I was 15. But my mum did suspect, because what happened one night is I didn't close the latch on the window, and she wondered what the window latch was doing open in the morning. But she never figured it out until I told her.
Fantastic. So it's almost that natural curiosity, adventurous spirit that you think is sort of giving you that almost gratitude for life, positivity. Yeah, you think that's where it sort of stems from, that just being grateful to be somewhere.
But yeah, the need to explore, the need to the space, the novelty. I love contrast in life, and that's why I enjoy going to the desert when I live in a temperate rainforest, and you go to school, you're surrounded by people, so your contrast is being alone at night, even from a very young age. So yeah, we were talking about one thing leading to another, but yes, must be something innate to have gone exploring, I suppose, at that age, on your own at night.
But I mean, because to me, it's quite, already what we've covered is quite a remarkable story so far. It's not one you hear every day. Does it seem very normal to you, or are you aware that it's sort of unique?
To me, it seems fairly normal, because it's not as though I've had to make great sacrifices or go against the grain in order to do it. It's just like a path which is opened in front of me, and I've been looking for that path, but it's opened in front of me and I've followed it. It's more that sort of thing. So yeah, for me, it's normal. What would really have gone against the grain would have been at the age of 23 to settle down and have a family and buy a practice and have a 9-to-5 job. That would have been much harder for me.
And I guess sitting here, I think it's really fortunate, that you had that foresight, because obviously, one of the reasons we're doing this podcast is I think, how many people get to 40, 50, 60 and then realize I should have gone to the Yukon Valley, So I think to have that awareness of that decision is, it was obviously a pretty powerful feeling to know already. It must have just been so like a natural feeling to feel like, I know that if I carry on doing this, there's going to be resistance. If you know what I mean, it's because I think that's a really fortunate thing that you must have had.
Yeah, I feel very fortunate to have had that opportunity, and so I'm very grateful to dentistry, for having a profession and to enable me to do that. So yes, it fulfilled its aim as far as that is concerned. Yes.
Fantastic. I guess before we get on to some of your other, you mentioned there some other travel. What were some of the kind of, did you have any experiences that particularly stand out from, your, let's say, the early days up in that part of the world?
Well, one that really occurs to me now is when I first went fishing, one of my first fishing trips in the bush, not on the ocean in a boat, but in the bush. And I wanted to catch some trout in the stream, just like Brian and I used to do on Exmoor. And so I found this stream where the salmon was spawning. This is about 40 miles outside of Stewart. It's called Hannah Creek. And there's this lovely little path by the river, small river, and which was a bit of a mystery to me because nobody ever used to go fishing there. But there was this lovely path. But lots of bushes, so you couldn't really access it. And then I came across this clearing, a beautiful clearing where it's been really nicely trodden down. It looked just like, where the cattle come down to feed on the river. It's that kind of thing. And I thought, wow, this is great. What a great spot to fish. I've got enough back car, so I start fishing and get a couple of thumping great pulls. And been there about 5 minutes, and then I hear this crash, 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 and then the crashing stops just the other side of the thick vegetation, and there's this sound, and it goes kind of like that. And of course, it's pretty obvious what it is. So I've never brought in my tackle so quickly in my life, and it's only about a 3-yard, 4-yard cast. Wound it up, got it, and charged back down the trail. And when I got to further up the creek, there's a vantage point where you can look down and see the pool where I'd been fishing. And there's this grizzly bear sitting there exactly in that fishing spot. I'd been in his fishing hole. And he had just come up to the bush, let me know he was there, kicked me off his spot, and that was it.
Unbelievable.
Close shave right there.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And also, I think it's really nice that you've sort of thanked almost dentistry for giving the opportunity to do it. Were there any interesting dentistry stories? Because I guess you must have dealt with some people from some remote places, or would you have gone to remote places, or?
I would have, but dentistry made it easier, and it enables you to see those communities as a working person rather than as a tourist. And I suppose my most interesting experiences in dentistry have to be working in the Arctic, because they only have visiting dentists once in a while. And when I say the Arctic, I'm talking about the Inuit communities in the north of Canada, in Nunavut, north of Manitoba. So places like Alfiat, which is the new name for Eskimo Point, for example, and then they're going further north, Rankin Inlet and Chesterfield Inlet, those places. And that was like being on another planet, and very sobering when it comes to the general health as well as the dental health of the Inuit. And it was very instructive because here's a group of people, a nation, if you like. I mean, they are distinct. They have their own language, Inuktitut, and the elders can't speak much English, the real elders, the guys that were on the land. And they were nomads until, the 30s, 40s, 50s, and then they started around the Hudson Bay posts and settled down, and their health really suffered as a result. And one of the Inuit told me this joke, so I think I'm on reasonably safe ground. He said, what do you get when you get 32 Inuit sitting in a circle? The answer is a full set of teeth, which is, but an Inuit told me that story. They recognise, the state that it is, and it's all about diet. I interviewed the guy in the local grocery store up there, the co-op store, and they sell everything there from fishing tackle to candies to snowmobiles. 90% of their sales was junk food.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So it's really the introduction of a Western diet that's...
Yes, absolutely.
Because obviously their diet would have been primarily, fish, probably whale, quite heavy on the fat.
Yeah.
But obviously then you transition to corn syrup, canola oil, God knows what else.
Yeah.
So, and obviously that's the fundamental, both dentistry and their general health, I guess.
Yeah, and in the north as a whole, I mean, there's this tsunami of diabetes happening because they're less able to deal with a Western diet because traditionally, genetically, their diet has been very different, and with all the health problems that go along with diabetes. Yeah, it's a dreadful situation, and it's purely about crummy food and drink. Coca-Cola. The average Inuit drinks something like 4 cans of Coke a day.
Wow.
And this is for a group of people who are on government assistance where Coke costs $2 or $3 a can.
Mm. It sounds like you had your work cut out as a dentist in that region then.
It was very, very challenging, because they've only had negative experiences, so of course they're very nervous, and treating the kids is, how do you treat a kid which is wriggling? Well, I was instructed how to treat a kid that is wriggling that won't cooperate. They have an abscess, they're in pain, they have to be treated, there's no general anaesthetic. You have to do the job. So how are you going to do that job? Well, it's called the blanket job. What happens is, because the mums never do it, it's always granny, sits the kid down on her lap, wraps the kid in a blanket so it can't move, and then you work on the child, screaming, and fortunately when you scream they open their mouths, so at least you can do the work. But that's how it is.
And I guess culturally as well, you must have had to have learned a lot about how to integrate into those new cultures, or, again, were you met with sort of any apprehension or? Apprehension,
very much so. They're very nervous when they come into that office because their experiences have all been or mostly been negative. Yeah. And culturally, they're pleased to see you. They're hospitable. They're a little bit reserved sometimes, but very open at other times. Very hospitable. And it helps if you learn a few words of the language. That always helps. And it was humbling. And I think the thing you really have to do in a situation like that is realize you're the visitor. You're not the doctor that's come to save them. You're the visitor, and you just sit down and be told what to do and go with the flow.
What would you say was some of the biggest takeaways you had from immersing yourself in the Inuit community and the time you spent with them?
What a tough life they have.
Yeah.
That would be my bottom line. You know, seeing them survive in that climate, and because the housing is like nothing you would nobody would want to live in here for the most part. You know, it's not even particularly well insulated. You know, in a place where the temperature regularly gets to -40, -50. And add the wind chill on that in an Arctic blizzard, I mean, 60 miles an hour, what have you got? I don't know, -70. So yes, how tough their life is. Everything has to be, there are no roads to most of these communities, so everything has to be going on the barge in the summertime, and when everything freezes up, the only way it gets in is through flying. Hence Coke at $2 a can and $3 a can in the wintertime. At that time, it's probably more now, I don't know.
Incredible.
Unbelievable. Yeah, it takes a lot of reflection, because I mean, I guess Dad and I went and saw Jordan Peterson a few days ago, last week, and one of the reoccurring themes was just that understanding of be kind of grateful for what you've got, even if it's not that great. And I guess it really does make you realise, you know, how on earth would probably half of this country manage and survive in a climate like that? You know, so it doesn't really bear thinking about, does it?
Well, it's not just that. I mean, it's the if you have an ectopic pregnancy in the wintertime, or any other time for that matter, but particularly in the wintertime when the airport could be closed for 3 or 4 days and you've got an internal bleed, well, there's no doctor in town. There are nurse practitioners, and in one place, it was Repulse Bay, I was told how this lady up there had an ectopic pregnancy, and she was suffering a lot of loss of blood. And this nurse practitioner got a whole bunch of people from the communities had come to the health centre. She blood type matched them, and she took blood and immediately transfused the appropriate blood type to this lady that was having the bleed, kept that going for 3 or 4 days until the flight was able to get in, and then and hooked her up with enough blood to get down to Churchill, where the nearest doctor was. So it's stuff like that.
It's challenges. It's challenges we can't even really comprehend. You know, we sit here and whinge about A&E having to sit there for 3 hours, which admittedly is not particularly nice on a Saturday night, but it's not waiting 3 days with an internal bleed in tough climate and conditions. So, yeah, fascinating. Well, I think if there's one thing I'm going to try and do is get out to see you and have a look around for myself. But I mean, I could hear stories about that all day. But I think so. I guess going back to, let's say, slightly more in a story arc. So you get stationed there, or you take the job there.
Just the Arctic was visiting. I was only
that's
there
right.
on a
So
visiting basis.
Sorry, I've forgotten the name of the place now. Stuart. So
Yeah.
you're based in Stuart.
Yeah.
What happens next?
The mine gets closed down, so all my patients disappear. So I have to go elsewhere. So I ended up going, and by that time I'd pretty well had enough of dentistry anyway. As I say, I was never really, the actual job I never really enjoyed. So I had an opportunity to become a stockbroker for a couple of years. So I felt I needed a financial education. So I did that in Vancouver, and that's what
I had no idea.
Yeah. So
Okay.
and it was a great education. It was 1981, 1982, and 1982 was an absolute disastrous year.
Absolutely.
But you never learn anything in an up market. You learn most in a down market, and the lessons were amazing.
How did you go from dentistry into stockbroking? Did you know someone that was in that? Yeah. So you had a chat and thought, well, I could have a go.
Yeah. Well, I guess he thought that it would do his company good to have people from other professions rather than people who'd just been stockbrokers and in the financial, to have some people with from other walks of life. And I was keen because it was something completely different, and the work had dried up in Stuart because the mine had closed, and so I was really keen to do it, and I'm very glad I did. I didn't make any money while I was a broker, but it certainly taught me a lot about financial management for my own affairs since.
And you're going from dentistry, which was very people focused, to stockbroking, which I would imagine is not as people focused or anywhere near that.
Well, it's still people focused in a way, because one of the things that they teach you there is the know your client rule. So you have to sit down with your client and know what their goals are and invest accordingly. In other words, if they're conservative, that's the sort of stuff you put them into. Some petty stock which is volatile, that kind of thing.
So the experience that you gained from all the years in dentistry and meeting all those amazing people then probably stood you in good stead when you moved over to stockbroking?
I'm not sure, really. It might have worked against me a little bit, because I found the brokerage industry actually, how shall I put it, pretty phony, actually.
Right.
I remember one of my last days, because the company I worked for went bankrupt, which was another process which was interesting to see, where the National Contingency Fund, which insures all brokers, had to step in and bail the company out. And I remember there thinking, well, I'm not going to be here much longer. Who shall I get to manage my affairs? And out of 24 brokers, I could see 2 that I would have trusted with my investments. Not because they were any good, but because they were at least trustworthy.
Yeah. I mean, just before we go into that as well, I mean, was there a nervousness going from into such a different career, or was it a necessity because the mine had shut, or was it
it wasn't a necessity. In fact, against the rules, I did a bit of moonlighting, doing a bit of dentistry here and there while I was in Vancouver, which I wasn't supposed to do, but I did it anyway, and. It was a bit of nervousness, sure, because it was different. I had to put a suit on every day, and that kind of thing. So there was a bit of nervousness,
And I guess also you were going back to a little bit of. Vancouver is obviously not necessarily London, but it's a major city. Yep. Was there a little bit of that resistance to getting back into that cramped environment, city life, or?
Yes, it was, and I found it much easier to go from the city to a remote location rather than coming back from a remote location into the city. Yeah, so yes, there was a bit. But it had its pluses. I met my wife there, and it was fairly social, and that's when I started going to aerobics class, and didn't have those in Stuart, and that kind of thing.
Or were you just going to the aerobics class to meet women, or?
Well, we had some pretty cracking instructors, yes. Yeah.
Excellent. And so after the stockbroking, did you stay in it, or did you stay on in sort of finance, or was it?
No, I left stockbroking because the company I worked for went bankrupt, and so after that, they laid a bunch of people off. They gave me the choice of staying, but I decided I didn't really like doing stockbroking anyway. It wasn't me.
Yeah.
So I went back to dentistry, and in Vancouver in a city practice this time. And that's where I stayed, because that's where Patricia was, who I'm with now.
Fantastic.
Did you, having had your stint as a stockbroking, when you came back into dentistry, did you have more of an appreciation for it, or were you quickly back into the?
It was. I hadn't really left it, so. And it was a different working environment, and actually, it was a very interesting working environment. Interesting in a. Maybe not the word to use, because it was a tragic working environment. It was in the early 80s, 82, 83, when HIV was first hitting the scene. And where I was working, it was in the West End of Vancouver. There was a particularly high percentage of people with HIV. It's an LGBT high population, high percentage living in that part of town, and so a lot of my patients had HIV. And so it was a very topical conversation, and I can remember, everybody knew this, and I remember the phone ringing and people asking me on the phone, "Do you treat?" At that time, they would refer to them as AIDS patients, and I would have to tell the truth. I'd say yes, and they'd straight away put the phone down. They did not want to go to a practice where AIDS patients were treated because they thought that they might be infected. It was a total panic going on.
Yeah.
Every bit as bad as the panic, or worse than what we saw with COVID.
I'm just going to go slightly off. I'll edit this out, but you know who was behind that, don't you? It was Fauci as well.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. He was behind the whole thing. So anyway, sorry, we'll definitely edit that out. But.
Oh, I must hear more about that.
Yeah, well, yeah. But was there any hesitation from your side on treating patients with AIDS and HIV?
Well, for me, there wasn't, because I'd been to a course and I'd learnt how the virus was transmitted. So with the appropriate protection, mask, glasses and gloves, which is what we should be doing anyway, I thought the risk was low to non-existent. So no, I worked there, and but I remember even some of my medical friends, were quite phobic about it.
Yeah.
I remember one surgeon friend of mine saying to me, "Well, look, Dick, you realise it's just a matter of time before you get this thing." And I just couldn't see it from a scientific point of view, so I didn't pay any heed to that kind of advice. And
just to be, so you lived outside of Vancouver. You said, or you commuted in, or you?
Well, at that time it was a West Vancouver, which is with no traffic. It's only about a 20-minute bus ride away.
Okay. Okay, so still pretty rural, not sort of.
Oh, it's Vancouver.
Yeah,
it's a suburb.
Okay.
And that's where we live now.
Okay. Okay, and so I guess you've touched on a couple of times sort of other trips as well. So obviously travel is a little bit in the blood. So I guess, maybe, so it sounds like you've actually had a fairly solid base in Vancouver for some time. I guess the kind of adventurous side maybe slows down a little bit when, you settle into the career, get married. But how, did the travel continue, or? Well,
not for a while, other than going to places in Mexico, and we had some interesting trips there, like seeing the monarch butterflies and all that, many other things, but not what I would call really adventurous travel. And when I finished dentistry, I wasn't really in the travel mode. I wanted to go back to school and do more work with environmental restoration. So I went to UVic, University of Victoria, and got a diploma in environmental restoration, and then started a company doing that, dealing with invasive plants. And so my focus was on that rather than travel. It was only when I sold that business and I had the time that I started the latest type of travel.
Wow. So just again, that's completely new to me. So if you don't mind me asking, what age were you at when you left dentistry and started that company? Well, started the education at the university.
I was 57, and so I got my diploma when I was 61, and I had retired from dentistry just a few months before I got my diploma, and then I started the business at 61. And then I sold it a few years later. Yes, that's the way it happened.
That's amazing.
It is. Yeah. What gave you the drive to do that? Was it just?
Well, because it was right in line with my conservation interest, and restoration is becoming more and more relevant to conservation and more necessary with everything that's gone on this planet. And that time, restoration was a really building new field, and I really wanted to do it and find out about it. And I did some fantastic courses from some great people, and it's really helped me manage my own little patch of forest since then, as well as given my volunteer activities good focus.
And where are some of the hotspots around the world for restoration projects that are happening at the moment, would you say? Is Costa Rica...
The hotspots for restoration, well, I mean, just about anywhere requires the restoration opportunities. My particular interest was in dealing with invasive plants, invasive species as a whole. The International Union for the Conservation of Nature regard invasive species as the number 2 factor in terms of species extinction, biodiversity loss. So that was something that I decided to focus on because I had the opportunity and I could see a real need for that in the area where we lived. Japanese knotweed and a lot of other plants imported from Europe that are rampant on the west coast now, which are severely and have the potential to even more severely affect the ecology of west coast forests.
Wow.
With just snowball effects in terms of habitat loss and loss of biological diversity.
Well, some 3 distinct parts to your career then, by the sounds of it. It's quite different parts as well.
Yeah, as I say, I like contrast.
Yeah, absolutely. And which was your favourite looking back, would you say? Or they all formed part of your career, I suppose?
Oh, the environmental restoration, without a shadow of a doubt. Because it's working outside. Which is that's the thing I didn't like about the other 2 professions. You're in this little box, and with environmental restoration, you're outside working, using your body, and I love that. And you can also, it's instant gratification, because when you're dealing with invasive species, you can instantly see, the impact you've made, and then over a period of time, with the revegetation by native plants, you can see the progress.
Now I'm going to maybe ask a slightly personal question, but would it be fair to say, well, number one, a lot of people I think would get to 60s and retire from dentistry and be like, cool, going to put the feet up and read a book, or or I don't know,
write a book,
or move to Spain and play golf. To me, what that feels like is I guess it almost seems like when you had the first opportunity to actually then go and really follow a passion, you took it. Would that be a fair...
Yes, it would be fair, because my environmental work up to that point had been on a volunteer basis, fundraising and being on boards and what have you. We started a wildlife sanctuary on the north shore of Vancouver in the early 90s, but this was my first actual work, if you like, And I didn't want to do the fundraising and the board level work anymore. I wanted to actually get my hands dirty and learn and touch things and all that stuff. So yes, there was that opportunity, and because of the progression of invasive plants, that was also a good time, because 10 or 15 years earlier it would have been a struggle to do it.
Would you say, in hindsight, you would have wished you'd done it earlier, or...?
Yes, I do. I wish I had done biology, done work in conservation, restoration earlier. Having said that, I don't know how I would have paid the bills, but at least I'd have got more of a background in it. And
well, that's really what I guess I mean, because I think, I think everyone struggles with this, which is your pragmatic brain, what you really want to do, and, that sort of convergence, and... at what point do you allow yourself to, explore that and move away from the pragmatic sort of, okay, we've got to just keep doing this. And then, and I suppose, again, a slightly difficult question is, do you look back and regret that you didn't do it earlier? Or do you think it was just a case of, no, do you know what? It happened in the right way?
It happened in the right way for me. I mean, talking about the decision making and it takes place there. I took the chicken's way out, I suppose, and I went back to school when I could afford to go back to school, and I didn't have to make any compromises financially. But as I say, I don't know how I would have earned a living. I guess if you feel passionate about something, you shouldn't dwell too much on that, because otherwise you'll just find a reason not to do it.
Well, I guess you mentioned that you sold the company.
Yes.
So I'm guessing it was relatively successful.
It was, but we're not talking big money here. We're only talking a few tens of thousands of dollars, that's all.
Okay,
so it wasn't a life-changing amount of money or anything.
Okay, but I guess what I mean is I just have this theory that when people actually can find a way to follow their passion, and they can do it without the pressure constraints of, all the stuff we face with, paying the bills. I just have this theory that actually when you follow your passion as a business, typically it seems to work out.
Yes.
As in, if you can do it with freedom, without the pressure, you can do it as an enjoyment. I think there's a lot of stories out there which would sort of indicate that actually most people tend to find a way of making it work. And actually, if more people could sort of actually get to a point and be like, no, this is what I have to do, I'm just going to make it work. I guess you just wonder what would happen. Yes, well, you'd have failures and you'd have successes. Yeah, exactly. Well, no, I mean, it was something Pete and I talk about. I look back on my education and took it for granted. I know I did now. I was quite apathetic about it. Everything was just a step. It was just not a means to an end, but it was like, I'll do what I can at school, and then I'll get to the next phase, and then I'll get a degree, but I'll just do enough. Then I'll get to the next phase. And it's frustrating. I'm recently 40, but it's even now I look back and think, what was I thinking? Like, why didn't I follow a passion a little bit more? No, I haven't got any regrets at this point. I'm very happy with how things are panning out. But now it's starting to come in. It's thinking, okay, where am I going next? I mean, I guess, do you have, and maybe this is something more towards the end we should be asking, but do you have any advice from a career perspective of, on your reflections from your career of what you might advise people? Yeah, I think on reflection, doing something because it's expedient is not a good enough reason. I think I would agree with what you're leaning towards, is to follow one's passion at an earlier stage for sure. Okay, you'll have to make some adaptations, but I would say definitely lean towards that rather than the expediency. Yeah.
And how did your experiences that we've covered so far shape your parenting with your children in terms of how you brought them up in terms of their career and things like that?
Well, I never had any children. I mentioned I had a granddaughter.
Yes.
That's because Patricia had a daughter who's my stepdaughter.
I'm with you, yeah.
And Jennifer, my granddaughter, is my granddaughter. She calls me grandpop. So I never had to counsel youngsters, kids in that way.
Right, okay, sorry, yeah.
But if I had, I would definitely have given them a lot more leeway. I would have encouraged them, but I think I would have tried to see where their strengths were and to support their strengths, whatever that was in, and persuade them to do what they really loved. Yeah. Because I'm with you, Adam. I think if you really love something, you're much more likely to make a success of it. Yeah. If you hate something, even though it's a very successful profession, it won't be a successful life. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I guess it's the constant battle of money,
you know, and
golden handcuffs.
Exactly.
But there's too much pressure, and this is where society steps in. You know, you're bombarded by pressure. You don't, I mean, sometimes with family, but more often by the media. You know, the billboards, the perceived. You know, what you think your girlfriend. She probably doesn't, but you think she wants. You know, a good life, and you make assumptions. You know, it all leads one to another.
Absolutely, yeah, and. I mean, again, do you think you would do anything differently? You know, in terms of even just how you set things up, and you know, because you said, you know, you did really what you wanted to do at 61. You know, looking back, do you think, okay, maybe we cut costs, we keep our budget down? You know, do you think there could have been a way to have transitioned earlier?
Yes, there could have been a way for sure, you know, to focus more on the biology. But that's the other piece of advice. You asked me about giving advice to people who are choosing a career. Is when you do something specialised, it's very, very difficult, or it's much more difficult to change. Doing something which is adaptable, you know, like IT, is in my view, a much better idea than putting yourself up a blind alley career-wise, which is what a specialty in the mental or dental profession is.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree, but I think it's probably grass is greener, because you do get that from IT, but I often think that a specialism would be great. You know, so I guess you always see the other side of it, but I think.
Yeah, I agree with you, but providing that you go into a specialty with some life experience, and then you've got your eyes wide open. The system that maybe it still exists today, I'm a little bit out of touch, but the system as it existed when you left school at 18, you got your dental degree at 23. I mean, in North America now, you have to have an undergraduate degree before you get your professional degree.
Yeah.
And at least it gives you a little bit more life experience. So you could go a specialty. So be an endodontist, say, by 26 or 27, you know, okay, it looks great on paper, but you've got no life experience, and it's almost like you've taken the automatic path to get there.
Yeah.
It's something that's close to my heart, because there is still that pressure to go to university. Well, you know, you study at 16, then you do your A-levels at 18, and then you go to university, graduate when you're 21, and if you do something outside of those timeframes, then it's kind of what's going on. So I lived in America for a year and travelled around, and then went to university when I was 21, and the 18-year-olds seemed so young. They'd no life experience, and all of our friends were internationals because they studied at 21, so they were that bit older, and there's a vast difference, I think. And I think you don't know what you want. Not many people know what they want to do when they're 18 or have much idea of what's out there. So I completely
you're forced
agree with you.
to choose.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or unless you deliberately break the mold like you did.
Yeah, and the education system's almost pushing you down the path. Choose a path earlier on. And you know, there's a lot of pressure to understand what you want to do at that age. I remember this rudimentary program that you'd enter, you know, what you were good at, what you liked, and it spat out a few careers at the other side. And you know, look back at that list now, and you know,
absolutely. Difficult. Well, do you remember as well? We were at Old Trafford talking with your old colleague in the Hilton. She was a PhD in, I mean. What was it? It was something
very, very granular.
Something around
very niche. Some
different form of chemical absorption. She did a PhD in some different way that drugs could be absorbed or something like that. And I mean, I guess she must have been late 40s, I think. And I just asked a very simple question: would you do it again? Because it's a big old commitment going down something that narrow. And she just straight away was like, no, I have no idea how I got to this place. Like, I have no idea how she got to this position. And but she worked for Pfizer actually as well. And I think she had a bit of an ethical conflict going on. Yeah.
But actually, what you describe, it sounds like it could be a pretty exciting field and have lots of applications to it.
I know, and but again, maybe this is just one of those things, which is, if you know, I'm sure a lot of people listening probably would be like, being a dentist up in Vancouver sounds absolutely perfect. Thank you very much. So Yeah, I guess we'll never know the answer to that question, but yeah, I guess back to travel, and you mentioned you've been to Mexico. Anywhere else that you've sort of been that's really taken your interest, or?
Well, since I sold the business, I've been able to go away for longer trips, and I've discovered I like long distance hiking. So my first long distance hike was to do the Israel National Trail, and that was one of the life's most amazing experiences. When I look back on it, it was absolutely staggering.
And just before we get into that experience, at what age did you discover that you liked long distance hiking?
66. Yeah.
Brilliant, fantastic.
Yeah, it's Patricia bought me a book for Christmas, and it's called A History of the World in 500 Walks, and I read through there, and by Boxing Day after, I had booked the flight to Tel Aviv.
Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. Sorry, were you going to ask something?
No, I was just thinking I'm going to have to get that book.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That sounds like
the Christmas list.
Exactly. That sounds like a big takeaway from a conversation, if I've ever heard one, of 500 walks.
How many of the walks are you through?
Oh, I've only done... let me see. Actually, I've done about 4 of them is all. Yeah, one of them in the Israel National Trail, which is my first choice, because it's just got everything. It's a total contrast to living in a temperate rainforest, because you're hiking for 3 weeks through the Negev desert, which was my favourite. And the rest of Israel was amazing for other reasons. The history, the people. I mean, I was treated extremely well on that trip. They have trail angels along there. You just phone them up and they'll put you up at their home and feed you and give you a place to sleep. No charge or anything. Often they'll come and pick you up, drop you off. Incredible experience. And also on the West Bank, I figured if I was going to go to Israel, I should go on the West Bank, and because there are so many misperceptions. Even though these guys live like a few miles apart. I was in a hostel one time, and I was staying with this businessman in a hostel in Tel Aviv, and I told him I was going over to the West Bank, and he looked at me and he said, "You're going to the West Bank?" He said, "Are you crazy?" He said, "You won't be safe there. You know, you go there and the mullahs, they preach jihad against us." Well, it wasn't what I'd heard anyway, so because I'd been to Bethlehem briefly beforehand in the West Bank. So I went there, and his perception could not have been more wrong. I went to mosque 5 times, and I didn't understand the Arabic because it's very, they talk very quickly. And I was with a friend of mine who could speak English, who lives in Hebron. And I said, Abed, what's this guy? He was so forceful in his delivery. The imam in the mosque. I thought he's got to be talking about something pretty sinister. So I said, but what was he talking about? And he was saying, that if you own a shop and you buy something for 10 shekels, you shouldn't charge more than 12 shekels, and definitely not 15, because that's just greedy and against the will of Allah. And I said, but Abid, he said it with such passion. And he looked at me a little bit indignantly. He said, those are important subjects, he said. Dead seriously. So, and I was treated so well in the West Bank. I call it hospitality on steroids over there. And here's this Israeli businessman, and of course, if he goes to the West Bank with Israeli plates, yes, his car will get stowed. But, that's for other reasons. But, you couldn't have more hospitable bunch of people. And the safety, I felt as safe there as I do at my cabin near Vancouver, which I call the safest place on earth.
It's a shame more people don't have those experiences and travel the world and experience that for themselves before prejudging based on some media report, isn't it? I mean,
well, it is, but it just demonstrates the people. You'd think that somebody who lived 10 miles from the border, because he, that's what he did, would at least have some idea, but he was more misinformed than anybody here. It was very sobering. And of course, now with recent events, people are going to say, oh, well, they're justified. But, you got to analyse the situation more than that rather than the people as a whole.
And you've got to understand the history.
And the history.
And I guess I think, unfortunately, I don't think a lot of people invest the time to really do that. But I think that's a really, I don't know what the word is, sobering, or I think it's really insightful, because, again, I think most people probably from around here would be very nervous about going into an area like that, or into such a drastically different culture where you hear, such extreme language being used, and you get a perception built up, which, again, my gut feeling has always been that's not going to be the case. But, was there any trepidation to go there, or would you just think, no, I have to go there?
No, there was no trepidation on my part at all. No, I introduced myself to the place very gently. When I go to somewhere different, I like to start off by going to school, and in this case, I went to language school to learn a little bit of Arabic. And when you start from that, instantly you've got like a family around you. You've got people who are looking out for you, and you get to learn about the culture while you're at school. You get to know of some great places to visit. You get to know some people, and it's a brilliant introduction to a country.
So just to be clear, so you would literally go to a school?
Yeah, I went to a language school for foreigners, basically, and for locals as well, to learn Arabic. Yes, in Hebron.
What gave you that idea?
I just thought it would be a great introduction to the country, and I felt I needed to learn some Arabic if I was going to go hiking there into some villages away from the city. In Israel, English isn't really strictly necessary because Israelis learn English. I think they start in grade 4, so most Israelis can speak English, at least to get by, ask directions, etc. I thought that wouldn't be as common in Palestine and that West Bank, and that turned out to be the case.
But I think it's amazing to think in that way, because I think most people go into these experiences thinking, what can this give me? Whereas you're thinking, actually, how can I almost get more from this, but, how can I integrate rather than, have this expectation? Because I think the English do that quite a bit because it's such a big language across the world. There's almost this case of I'll just go there, and I'm guilty of it. But I think it's an amazing mindset to approach going into a new place.
Well, it makes your experience much richer. It's amazing the ice that it breaks, even if you can only speak a few words. Tell the guys where you're from and where you live, and answer your name and stuff like that. How are you? Even really basic stuff. It makes such a huge difference.
Well, you do that everywhere you go.
I completely agree. I mean, even if it's just the odd word here and there. Shukran is an Arabic word. I know that, but I don't know many more than that. But in Hebrew, l'chaim and things like that, I completely agree. And I've worked in Paris and seen British I remember this one time a British family came into the shop and were shouting at the top of their voice in English at the poor French assistant behind the counter, expecting them to understand. It was so arrogant and such horrible behaviour. And unfortunately, but I think it does break down barriers by learning the odd word here and there, and and try and embrace their culture a little bit. Even if you can't converse any further, I think it does open doors. Yeah, but I think going to learn Arabic in a Arabic language school is a great idea. Yeah, absolutely. It really makes you think. I mean, I guess a lot of people wouldn't be away for 8 weeks, let's say, so maybe it's a bit tricky, but even still, what a great idea.
Well, I had to wait till I sold the business, so I had the time.
Yeah, and so it was an 8-week trail. What was roughly the journey? So it was...
Actually, I was only in West Bank for about 7 weeks. So the journey was, and I wasn't able to complete it because I got stomach trouble over there but it was I started in the north of the country in Nablus, and I ended up a couple of days south of Hebron. So that most of that middle bit I hiked, and saw some amazing things, like the where Jesus was described as being tempted in the Bible. In Jericho, and some amazing places. Abraham's tomb, which is a bizarre place if ever there was one. It's in Hebron, and Abraham's tomb is divided into two. On one side are the Israelis, the Jews, and on the other side are the Muslims, and they only have access to half the side. But 11 days a year, the Muslims have total access, and 11 days a year the Jews have total access. So it is possible to cooperate on some level.
Amazing, yeah, amazing. And what other trails have you been on? You said you've done 4. But you said that's your favourite.
Yeah, the Israel National Trail, I would say, was my favourite. The West Bank Trail, I mean, the problem with the West Bank, it's such a small area. You don't get the same openness that you get even in the Negev Desert, and the space between the communities and the feeling of isolation. So you feel like, for the most part, you're fairly close to a settlement, but there are some spectacular places and spectacular scenery. So it definitely has some very exciting points on it as well. I mean, there's this one monastery west of Bethlehem, Masaba, and it has to be seen to be believed. I mean, a lot of it's carved out of a rock, and it's one of the oldest monasteries in the world, and it's just an amazing place.
Mind-blowing.
Stuff like that you come across, here and there.
Yeah, and where's left on the list? Where's number 1 on the list of places you've not been to yet, or you'd like to?
Well, my next trip, I was considering going to Lebanon. Obviously, that's going to have to be postponed. And the reason for that is because on my last hike in the Sinai Desert, I was hiking with a Lebanese lady, and she was telling me, you got to come to Lebanon, and she was telling me why, and there's such a huge diversity of landscape and culture in a very small country, so you get exposed to so much, so many differences in a short time.
Remember, my wife and I worked in Paris, and we met this Syrian guy who worked with us, and he said, "You've got to come for some Lebanese food." There was no Syrian restaurant in Paris, but we went for a Lebanese, at the time I don't think, but we went for a Lebanese meal. It was absolutely incredible, the food. Lovely, yeah.
Yeah, I like Middle Eastern food,
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, very good.
But you seem to be sort of gravitating towards that area. Is there a reason why? Or?
Well, part of it is because it's a total contrast to where I live, and partly because I don't like to travel in the summertime, because the best place in the world to be in is British Columbia in the summertime, as far as I'm concerned.
I can well believe that.
And so winter time, I like to be, in the desert where it's cold. It's cold at night. You get frost on the tent and stuff, but at least it's not -10. And also, it's just the history. What interests me is how communities can be so antagonistic towards each other, and how that war situation, that constant sort of conflict situation, which has been going on for a very long time, how it's able to persist. What it is, and I like to sort of look at that and the reasons for it, and think, what can we learn from that? And is there anything that anybody can do to in that situation?
And so actually there is a little bit of sort of history and political kind of interest in the area as well.
Definitely.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah. But I think a lot of people would fall short of going there, I have to admit. Because again, I think we could talk for hours about it, but I would love to understand, the actual genuine insights that you get from the ground in terms of real feelings, real insight. I think one of the things I'm concerned about is obviously, frankly, how the media portrays any situation without real depth, without any real. I don't want to be too controversial on a podcast, but I think. Another podcaster I really like, a guy called Lex Friedman. He went, as soon as the Ukraine war kicked off, he went straight out there to. He was willing to risk his health, whatever, just to make sure that he could get a really balanced view and get some genuine insight into, outside of really what the mainstream was presenting back.
Well, I mean, what insight can you get after only 6 months of walking through and talking to people? And, my very simplistic insight is that if you want to particularly look at that part of the world, Israelis and Palestinians, they're just people. And 99% of them just want what you and I want, which is a quiet life, to bring up their kids, send them to a good school, have a roof over their head, some decent grub. But unfortunately, actually, I'm getting to think it's the way we operate as a species. What I call the moderate majority doesn't get to make the rules. It's the motivated minority that are leading the rest by the nose. And it's only when things get really, really, really bad that it gets the attention of the moderate, what I call the moderate majority. And in the case, I'm sorry if I'm offending anybody here, but in the case of the Israelis, they are taking land, they are claiming land in the West Bank. It's a creeping thing. It starts out as an outpost, a few people going there in a camper van, and ends up being a trailer, and then a fence goes up around the trailer, and then a few more trailers, and then they start a school, and this is all illegal according to the Israeli government. But then after 10 years, 15 years, if you stick it out long enough, all of a sudden you're legal. And this is a process that's carrying on now, and been carrying on since the '67 war and since the '67 war. And so these people, and they are on the extreme, tend to be on the extreme side of the Israelis. They are displacing the Palestinians from that land. The Israelis don't regard it, Jews don't regard it as displacement, because they were given that land by God. So literally, it is their God-given right to claim this land. This is what some Jews believe.
Yeah.
The ones we would call the extreme. But they're displacing Palestinians, and that is creating resentment. And when it goes on since 1967 on an ever-increasing basis, and you've got checkpoints all around the West Bank, their lives on the West Bank, never mind Gaza, which is another couple of factors worse than the West Bank, their lives are tough. And they've got a whole bunch of young men there who feel they've got nothing to lose.
Yeah.
So what's going to happen when you have a whole bunch of young men who feel they've got nothing to lose?
And two questions off the back of that. And I mean, look, I think with the conflict going on, I think this is perfectly correct terrain, frankly. I see that there's two sides. First, my question is do you feel you would have taken that perspective if you hadn't have been there? Do you think you would have been able to have gathered that insight from...
I don't think so. It would have been much harder for me to do that, because you really need to experience. For me, I really need to experience the hospitality and the generosity, and to really feel in my gut, the fact that they are just like me. 99% of the people there.
Yeah.
When I was in the West Bank, I experienced a living of religion, like people living their religion on a day-to-day life, not just praying on a Saturday or a Sunday or whatever religion you happen to be, a Friday in this case, but actually living their religion more than I've seen anywhere else. In terms of being kind to people, supporting people, generosity, entertaining strangers, all this kind of stuff. They're in the situation where they are, and they come across the way they do because of the action of a few extremists. It's the same rule again. Yeah. They're ruled by their motivated by minority too. Hamas is their motivated minority. Hezbollah is their motivated minority. And and that's what shapes our perception of all Muslims. I mean, that's like shaping your whole view of Christians on the Ku Klux Klan activities. Just about. I mean, it's crazy.
I think it's a great way of looking at it. Yeah.
I walked through the Grand Mosque in the UAE a couple of years ago, albeit it's a very modern building. One of the most beautiful buildings I've ever been to in my entire life. And it's the scripture on the wall and what, the be kind to your neighbour, the volunteering, the helping other people. It's just clear as day to me. It was just such a peaceful, and it was just such an amazing experience for me. I'm not religious, but walking through that mosque that day was really special.
It is. Those mosques are amazing. But even the humble mosques that you go to, in the middle of nowhere on the West Bank, that claims to be Noah's tomb or something. Well, there's about 3 of those. But they have something in common. They're all open. Yeah. And as a non-believer, you're welcome. Yeah. And you go there and pray, and it's all cool.
Yeah, magic. Yeah, lovely.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I think we could go on for hours, but I think maybe we should. We're an hour and 40 in, so I think. Maybe we should wrap up. But I guess to sort of bring it back full circle, my summary from this conversation is, I find it very inspiring, number one. I think there's so much there to learn from decisions at different points and, sort of bravery in those decisions and, how to people can learn so much, I think, from carving out a path that, it isn't... Because, you may have been in dentistry, which you could argue is a professional, career, but it's still... It's what it enabled you to do and the decisions you made around that. And I can't even imagine some of the things you must have seen along the way and experienced, which... so I think for me, it's just a fantastic learning experience to, well, I feel quite inspired to go and, A, buy that book, but B, go and see, it just makes me think, just go and experience more communities, more culture, more, remote places, different places, which I already knew, but I think, again, it just sums up, I have a bit of a ongoing thing right now where I think I'm concerned too many people are happy sitting in front of Netflix. They're letting life just happen, without any intention or without any real thought, almost like they're just waiting for something to fall in their lap to then really make them go and do a trail or do, go and fish salmon next to bears. And, so I think for me, it's been fantastic. And obviously I've learned a lot because like I said, I've known you a long time, but not got to hear these stories. So it's been fantastic.
Yeah, really lovely to meet you and hear your stories. What I loved about all the things we've talked about today is you haven't ever reached or hit any cul-de-sacs. You haven't reached a point in your life where you think, I don't know where to go. You've had some obstacles along the way, but you've thought, right, well, now I'm going that direction. Now I'm going to go in that direction. And by the way, I need to go in that direction next. I think there's a lot to be learned from that attitude. And it's a very glass half full. I mean, it's clear you're a glass half full person. It's clearly, it's come across that way to me. You've tackled everything that you come across in your life with such positivity, and learning languages in local areas in different parts of the world, I think is fantastic. You've clearly got a curious mindset, and you want to learn more about different people that you've met along the way. And there can't be many people out there that have experienced the different communities that you have in your life, with the Inuits to the Palestinian people and the Jewish people and what have you. So yeah, it's fantastic.
We're all one family.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, absolutely. Have you written a book? Is there a book in the offering? Or?
Well, I write short stories, and actually it's called The Extended Family. Right. Because I do feel, well, we are. It's not a matter. I do feel we are all related. Yeah. We're all ultimately a common source, even down to the other life forms on this planet. And so, I think we need to emphasise that a bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. I am also just going to finish with one story. So I guess what would it have been? I probably was about 15. I don't know if you remember when it was. It was when we lived in Great Kingshill.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in my bedroom, and Dad, I think you had a 82 Lafitte or Latour or something. And my memory may not be right, but my understanding is that you flew back purely for this bottle of wine. At least that's what I thought. And I was sat in my bedroom at 15, and I could just hear, I think, was Frank there? I think, and Dad. Anyway, I'm not telling the story very well, but I was sat in my bedroom with the window. It was the summer. I was in the bedroom. I could hear them just talking, and there was like this excitement and this hustling. I was like, "What's going on?" And then I just hear this noise from my bedroom of, and just this enthusiasm coming up from the. And it was obviously you were trying this wine and just really trying to get the whole thing.
Actually, I think it was a 50 Margaux, wasn't it?
No, it was an 82 Cheval Blanc.
Was it?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. It was very good anyway.
Yeah.
The flight over.
I don't know if that is the only reason you came over, but at least it was nice to, But again, yeah.
Again, it's another example of how totally enthusiastic he is about things like, knowing all the best wines, and it's just the same with beer. It doesn't matter,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so yeah. I mean, I don't know if you've got any more questions, but.
I always finish with the same question, but I'll ask you as well, Richard. If you could go back to your 21-year-old self and give yourself one piece of advice with all the experience that you've gained in those years, what would it be?
It would be get out of dentistry right now and go into biology.
Yeah.
So in other words, stop immediately doing what I was doing for expediency and doing what I love or what I knew I loved.
Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah. Really interesting.
Great way to finish, I think.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
interesting.
You've sort of to have this conversation has just reminded me of so many things and brought back so many memories, and also sort of helped put me, reminded me of things and put things in perspective and stuff I'd thought I'd completely forgotten. And that's how remembering is. One thing leads to other, so it's just like a chain reaction.
Yeah.
I've never felt so real. Are you crushing up another pill? Let's never ever go to sleep again. Wait, I think I'm starting to fade again. I don't want the end. Call up your friend, but